Right, so we're going to go over completing the square, and really what we're trying to get to is to be able to graph quadratics and to use the transformations that we've been talking about. So quickly I wanted to say, recall, we've talked about this before. When we square a binomial, we get a trinomial. What does that look like? It looks like one of two things. Maybe it's x plus a, so we square it and we have x squared and 2ax plus a squared. Or maybe it's x minus a squared, so it's x squared minus 2ax plus a squared. What I want you to pay attention to is that these both have a 2 in the middle, right? And that's really key to our discussion, so we're going to come back to this. So I want you to see that 2, right? So that 2 is going to be important. And really what have we been trying to do with graphing quadratics is I need it to be in this certain format, which is a times x plus h squared plus k, or a times x minus h squared plus k. So the plus h, like inside the parentheses, tells me to move to the left, or the minus h inside the parentheses tells me to move to the right. But it's important that I have the parentheses. So it's a certain type of format is what we're trying to get to. We'll worry with the k, we'll worry with the a later. Today we're trying to get to that h. So let's start with something easy. Let's say I have x squared plus 6x plus 9. So I think, well, it's not in that format, right? I don't have that squared. I have this other x. So what would I want to do? I want to change the format. So I thought, well, what if we could just factor? Like, that's a good start. So I can. X squared plus 6x plus 9 happens to be x plus 3 times x plus 3. Notice it's the same thing twice, so I can turn it into x plus 3 squared. And isn't that the format I wanted? I wanted to be able to say, like, how am I transforming this, right? So now I can see it because it's x plus 3 squared. So that plus 3 says I'm going to take x squared and I'm just going to move it over to the left 3 units. So let's try that. So let me pop in a graph and maybe pick a better color. Let's do black. So I just know it's going to move to the left 3. So 1, 2, 3, here is my vertex, and go 1 to the right, 1 to the left, and then we can just connect those dots. I'm not looking for a perfect graph. I want a nice sketch, but I can see what happened. So I went from x squared plus 6x plus 9. Now I have x plus 3. Looks pretty good. But I want to say, well, what would happen with some other ones? So let's try some more, just see how it works. So here I have x squared minus 8x plus 16, and the same kind of thing. I wanted to change the format, and I did. I said, let's factor it. I got x minus 4, so it's x minus 4 squared. Again, really lucky, it comes out pretty. So again, go over and say, what does minus 4 do? Oh, that moves to the right 4. So here's my 4. 1 to the right, 1 to the left. Connect those dots. There's my quadratic. Now, I don't want you to think I was going to work out this nicely. So let's say, what if I had x squared minus 2x minus 3? This time, if I were to factor this one, I would get x minus 3 times x plus 1. And this really doesn't help us because, yes, it may give us the intercepts. It doesn't tell us where that vertex would go. It really isn't giving that description of how do I make the horizontal transformation that I need to make because I don't have the x part squared by itself. So we want to have something else. We want to have another strategy or tool to help solve these kind of problems. So let's keep going and let's take care of this by saying, let's get to this thing called completing the square. So the goal here is to have it in that format we were talking about earlier, to have it in either the x plus h squared or the x minus h squared, but I need that x part squared, like that's the important part. So let me show you a couple of examples of how we're going to get there. Is we're going to go back to this trinomial, right? I said this was key to our discussion, is this relationship between the two. So the x plus a, see how it was 2ax, and the x minus a, it was 2ax. Well, what's the relationship between this 2a and this a? Well, it's half. What's the relationship between negative 2a and a? It was half. What we end up doing is whatever I give you, x squared, doesn't matter if it's plus or minus, I'm going to add b over 2 squared. I'll probably keep the sign with it because I think that's really helpful. But I want you to see it's half. Half is what I'm adding. So whatever I have, x squared plus or minus bx, I'm going to add b over 2 squared. Okay, that's my strategy. Why am I going to do that? Because then it's going to perfectly factor into x plus or minus, depending on what we started with, b over 2, and the squared moves outside. So it's going to go from something that wasn't in the right format to the format that we want to. But we'll step through and we'll see that in a process. All right, so here's our first one. Let's say I had x squared plus 10x. Okay, what am I going to do? I want to add b over 2. So my b here is 10. So I'm going to have 10 over 2 squared. Right? So it's always whatever number is in front of the x, I'm going to divide that by 2 and square it. So here's what I have. I have x squared plus 10x, and I have 10 over 2 squared. Okay, 10 over 2 is 5. 5 squared is 25, so we can write it that way. And notice that that does factor into x plus 5 times x plus 5. So on purpose, like this is not a coincidence that it came out to be x plus 5 times x plus 5. It was by how we pushed it, it's by what we added. And that turns it into a perfect square, right? So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make something that was not a square. X squared plus 10x was not a square, but by adding this little bit, I turned it into one, right? That's the goal. All right, so let's try graphing like that. So let's say I had something similar. I have x squared plus 10x plus 18. So it's still the x squared plus 10x I just had. I just added the 18 to make it a little bigger. So we're going to still complete the square. I want you to see this other part. Now, if I add 10 over 2 squared, I've changed the function I started with. So do you notice I also subtracted it? If I add 10 over 2 and then subtract 10 over 2, I've added 25 and subtracted 25. So I'm making sure I'm balancing it. I'm not adding something that I don't also take away. So it's just a format change is what's happening here. So we just did in the previous screen that this x squared plus 10x plus 10 over 2 squared becomes x squared plus 10x plus 25. I have this 10 over 2, which is 5 squared, there's 25, and then plus the 18. We know what x squared plus 10x plus 25 is going to do. It's going to become x plus 5 squared. Negative 25 and 18 gives me negative 7. So now I have this nice format where I can say x plus 5, oh, I know that's going to move to the left 5, and then minus 7, that's going to move down 7. Okay, so we're graphing x plus 5 squared minus 7. So I'm moving 5 to the left and then 7 down, which is like barely on my graph, but it's there. So 5 to the left, 7 down, 1 to the right, 1 to the left, and then I have my curve. There are certain things I want you to start seeing that's going to make this easier for you. It is always this number. So the part that was the x, I'm taking that and I'm dividing by 2. So 10 over 2 is 5 squared. And then I have to add it and subtract it. But this part of the factoring will become x plus 5. You don't have to go through 10 over 2 is 5, 5 squared is 25, and then how do I factor it? We're doing a particular format, like it's always going to be the same. So whatever number that I get from dividing by 2, that's what goes in the square. And I'll show you, we'll do it some more, and then maybe it'll become clearer. So let's try again. I have x squared minus 12x. Same thing, I want to complete the square. We'll do that first before I do a graph. So this time I wanted to leave that sign, that negative. So negative 12 over 2. Okay, so negative 12 over 2 is negative 6. But you know, when you square negative 6, you get 36, right? So just the number in front of x, divide by 2 and square it. Then we think, can we factor it? And again, we can. We get x minus 6 times x minus 6. It is not a surprise that it's the same thing twice, right? We did that on purpose. So that says it's x minus 6 squared. What I want you to see right now is I took this number 12, I divided by 2. What's negative 12 over 2? It's negative 6. So you could skip from here to here. It should become shorter the more that we do it. Right, so let's graph the last one, right? That was our buildup of it. So we have g of x. I have x squared minus 12x, and then I'm going to add negative 12 over 2, and I'm going to square it. Remember, if I add it, I need to also subtract it. And then I have plus 40. Now this piece is easy. This is x, negative 12 over 2 is minus 6, and I square it. Minus negative 12 over 2 is 6. 6 squared is 36, plus 40. So this is x minus 6 squared, negative 36 and 40. That becomes plus 4. So if I want to graph this, minus 6 says right 6, and then up 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's my vertex. 1 to the right, 1 up. 1 to the left, 1 up. There's my graph. Let's try another one. I want to make sure you have the concept of what we're trying to do. Let's go back to the one I had earlier. I had x squared minus 2x minus 3. Okay, what do I want to do? I want to take this number, this negative 2, divide by 2 and square it. So it's always the number in front of the x, divide by 2 and square it. Then what happens? Whatever I add, I also have to subtract. Let's fix that. This should be subtract. Okay, so I added negative 2 over 2 squared. Let's subtract negative 2 over 2 squared. I still have this minus 3. That's fine. Okay, all of this piece becomes x. Negative 2 over 2 is minus 1, and I square it. Then I have minus negative 2 over 2. I'll show it you the long way. That's negative 1 squared minus 3. So this is x minus 1 squared. This is minus negative 1 squared is 1, minus 3. I have x minus 1 squared minus 4. So this one goes over 1, down 4, 1 to the right, 1 to the left. There's my graph. Let's try one more, make sure that we really understand what's going on. So let's say I have f of x is x squared, let's say plus 14x, and then let's say, I don't know, minus 6. So what are we going to do? We're going to take half of 14, x squared plus 14x plus 14 over 2, and I'm going to square it. I just added 14 over 2, so I'm going to subtract 14 over 2. And I still have the minus 6. So 14 over 2 squared add, 14 over 2 squared subtract, everything else stays the same. Now let's group it. So let's group x squared, 14x, and 14 over 2. That's x. 14 over 2 is 7, and I square it. Then 14 over 2 is 7, I square it, that's 49 minus 6. Now I have x plus 7 squared, 49 minus 6, that's 55. Okay, really big number. Let's just make this up. Let's call this 55, okay? So way down here is 7. So I went 7 to the left, 55 down. Remember my scale is off, so it'd be just barely here, and then connect the dots. We're really just trying to get like the idea of where it's at. So it's negative 55 down, 7 to the left. I really want you to get that. How do I do this to complete the square? So let's make sure we wrap this up right. So x squared plus bx. You add b over 2 squared, it becomes x plus b over 2 squared. If it's x squared minus bx, then you're going to add negative b over 2 squared to get x minus b over 2 squared. So if I had x squared plus 20x, what would I add? I'd add 20 over 2 squared, and I get x plus 10 squared, right? 20 over 2 is 10. If I had x squared minus, let's pick another big number, let's say I had 44x, then I would add negative 44 over 2 squared, and it would give me x minus 22 squared. So even though I made a big number, I didn't really have to do any other work. I hope that helps. I hope that makes sense. Good luck.